Oh, hello, nerds. This is Let's Talk About Myths, baby, and I am that host of yours, the one who just so fucking pumped to learn literally everything imaginable when it comes to the ancient world. Liv. Okay, so today's episode, it's amazing. I'm so excited. It's so ridiculous and wonderful. And Herodotus, well, he is Herodotus. Whew, where would we be without him? It isn't a stretch to say that the modern Western world would be incredibly different if we didn't have Herodotus. If so many early notions of ancient history hadn't been based on his writings, for good or bad, he was influential, to say the absolute least. And of course, as some of you may have already noticed, I also use this episode to take the opportunity to quote Assassin's Creed Odyssey. Because Herodotus. But also because I connected with today's guest, Kate Minniti, via AC Odyssey. We did a stream together for the Save Ancient Studies Alliance, and it was so much fun that the moment Kate suggested that she could come on and talk not only Herodotus, but Herodotus in Egypt, oh man. I'd also known Kate from Twitter for a long time, but honestly just knew her as the person with the profile image that is just that incredible Fayum-style portrait of Cassandra from Odyssey. But needless to say, it's a memorable profile picture. Kate actually studies Egyptology too, which is supremely cool. I've said this before, and I'm about to say it again in the conversation, but the only real mythology that I think I could and probably will branch out onto on this show would be Egyptian. Because Egyptian was my first love in so many ways, and I just find it so fascinating. But it also just has these incredible overlapping moments with Greece in a way that is just super interesting. Enter Herodotus. Herodotus as a historian is not something I'll wade into. I don't know enough, and I know it's controversial to suggest one way or the other. But he was influential and important, regardless of how accurate he may or may not have been. And he was interested. That's what I love. He was genuinely interested. He wanted to learn about the world around him. He wanted to travel and talk to people and write down what he heard. That alone is so vital and provides us with such insights into the ancient world, accurate or otherwise. His time, or perhaps no time at all, in Egypt is the perfect example of this. And Kate shares so much about Herodotus' writings about Egypt and how they compare to actual Egyptian history and mythology. I learned so much about not only Herodotus' writings, but Egypt too. Plus, there are some truly hilarious moments. I just had such fun listening through to this to edit it again. I can't wait for y'all to hear it. So on that note, conversations. There's much to do and many unknowns on the horizon. Herodotus in Egypt with Kate Minniti.
I'm a jack of all trades. Like, Herodotus is not the topic of my dissertation, but I have classics and I have Egyptology and I have classical archaeology. So and I've been dealing with Herodotus since high school. We met in high school.
I mean, I literally only have a BA, but I can talk about mythology to the ends of the earth. So it's really all about the thing you can talk about a lot, right?
Absolutely. I'm always here for the slander.
Right? Oh my God. Yeah, no, I'm ready for it. I don't know enough about, because I don't really focus on history much. So, but I get that aspect when I'm talking to people like you. So it's very fun for me. Yeah, so let's just dive right into Herodotus then. Why don't we just kind of start this off? I'm just going to let my listeners know how this started, this conversation, which was purely a matter of we did a stream of Assassin's Creed Odyssey where Kate was playing, and then that always leads to talk of Herodotus. And then I think you just vaguely were like, I can talk Herodotus in Egypt. And I was like, please, let's do that. Because all of my knowledge of Herodotus is based on Assassin's Creed Odyssey, which, while I think that's perfectly fine, it is definitely not historically accurate in any way, much like Herodotus himself, as I've gathered. So it kind of suits.
Yeah, he's that kind of guy. Yeah, I basically slid into the DMs and say, hey, do you want to talk Herodotus and Egypt? And the answer was a resounding yes. There was enthusiastic consent, so yes.
I mean, any reason for
Oh.
me to have like opportunity to bring up Odyssey in a conversation as well, because as my listeners have learned by this point, like I did not play video games other than N64 until I bought a PS4 specifically to learn to play Odyssey. It remains basically the only game that I play. I've played like a bunch of Origins. I'll go through like a period where I'll play some Origins because at least it's ancient Egypt. And so I'm like, I can still get my fix of the ancient world. But then I get frustrated with the gameplay and I just go back to playing Odyssey, which I've played through like 5 times now because I have a problem.
Yeah, that works. I'm replaying Origins several times. When I want to relax, I just fire up Origins.
That's exactly me with Odyssey because I just know the gameplay so perfectly that it's easy. But then the Origins, so, like if I because I learned on Odyssey, Odyssey's a little bit fancier, so I always get frustrated with what you can and can't do in Origins.
Poor Bayek, he's only a man.
It's
Um,
just so much more tricky. But
I know, I know. So sorry, we just we
no,
just
no. I
well,
mean,
we
I
did
again, I
something.
could do it. I can do it anytime. Just talk
Listen,
about Odyssey.
digressions are very Herodotian, so I think we are very on topic here.
But yeah, I mean, Herodotus in general is so interesting. Like the very idea of him, I've covered very briefly. Like I think it was just like 2 bits of story from the histories in the podcast, which I did like I don't even know. It was like at least 3 years ago now. But I know it was like is it Artemisia? Uh,
Hmm.
yeah, and another woman that he talks about, whose name I've completely forgotten. But basically, I was like, well, I found cool stories of women in Herodotus. I'm going to cover them. And that's like all I've ever done. But Egypt was my first love as like just mythology and history generally, like long before I really got into Greek mythology. So I'm excited to hear what on earth that man did down there and what on earth he came back saying.
Yeah, so maybe we can start from like the very beginning, like he does, and and introduce Herodotus to listeners who may not
Great
be,
idea.
familiar with him. So Herodotus is, apart from being a character in Assassin's Creed Odyssey, he was a historian, self-proclaimed historian. He was born in Halicarnassus, which is in modern-day Turkey, and he was a Persian subject. He was not a member of like any Greek polis because at that point, Persia had ruled over Anatolia, and he is the scion of a tradition of people trying to make history and trying to write about history with different outcomes. And he tries very hard to so his goal is to write, and he says this like at the very beginning of his book, which is, well, it's titled by the Alexandrine scholars, who then reorganized it and divided it and everything. As you know, Alexandrine scholars, they reorganized everything. They had issues. He says he wants to tell the story of how Greece and Persia came to blow. And he takes it very, very, large. And so he takes it from very far. And he starts with mythological women being kidnapped between Africa and Europe, between Asia and Europe, actually. And so he talks about Io, and he talks about Europa, and then he talks about Thebes and the foundation of Thebes and your boy Cadmus. And he he tries to give this very large overarching arc of history in which everything has brought to the point of the Persian Wars, which he had not seen in person. He would have been a baby maybe when the second one happened, but he tells us that he had interviewed people that had been in the wars, or that he knew people who were in the wars. And so he's trying to build this sort of big project to explain why this animosity had, had developed between the two empires. Although Greece is not an empire, should have not used that word, but he's trying, that is his goal. And in his work, he tries to also describe the Persian Empire. And the way in which he does is he does these giant digressions in which he's talking about things that are in the Persian Empire, but not necessarily related to the Persian Wars, and Egypt is one of them. So it is very easy to take book two, the part of book two that is about Egypt, as a nice, fun, historical experiment about describing Egypt, or like its ethnography or anthropological studies and everything else. But it's actually still part of Herodotus' agenda of describing the Persian Empire and then explain why they started the Persian Wars. Wow, I didn't take a single breath in all of that.
I know that feeling well. I just love the idea of like their intentions behind everything, and like what that really does end up saying about what the actual writing is. And then so often that gets kind of forgotten when people are reading it now, because it's been 2,500 years, and so it's like you often just read what they're writing, at face value. I've encountered this primarily in Plato talking about Atlantis, and just the way I can't seem to fully get through to some people the idea that, like, no, but all of it is a lie, so you can't question any of it. So somebody recently, like, gave me a review where they kind of asked a question about Atlantis, which is not an easy way to respond to anything. But they were basically like, well, but Solon talked to people or something. And I was like, no, you're, if by like believing that Solon talked to Egyptians about Atlantis, you are inherently ignoring the primary point, which is that, like, there's literally no evidence that the person talking about Solon had any contact with Solon, or maybe was even real at all.
Exactly. Or that Solon ever actually went to Egypt. Which,
exactly.
People will fight you about.
Let alone, like, talk to somebody later who talked to somebody who then talked to Plato, or not Plato, who talked to Socrates, who then talked to Plato. No. Anyway, no. That's all I can think about when I hear this talk of like, the reasons why I think Herodotus was writing. But the Egypt, and now this is me completely having no grasp on the history, which I really should have a better one. But was Egypt taken over by the Persians?
Yes, it had been taken over in, plot twist, in 525 BC. It had been taken over. The last pharaoh of Egypt was a really sad affair. Not him, but like what happened to him, because he was taken and deported as an enslaved person, which is a very sad way of, ending a glorious tradition of everything. But he is also, so we don't really know what happens to him. Yeah, so Egypt is under recommended rule. They absolutely hate it. We are told in non-certain terms by Egyptian sources and other sources that they did not like the Persians. And Herodotus makes a point in telling us about how Cambyses, who was the Persian king who had conquered Egypt, was a terrible man. He killed the Apis bull. He disrespected all the gods. He looted, temples and everything else. There's really no record of this in Egyptian sources, which is, on the one hand, if anything horrible had befallen them, maybe we would have no record, because Egyptians tended to, let's just say, glide over things that were not properly favorable to them. But on the other hand, there's really no record of this, and it would not make sense, because this is one of the things that happened with Egypt, and we see that with Alexander and the Romans too. You go there, you need to adapt. So you take an Egyptian name, or the Egyptian transliteration of your name, and you are represented according to Egyptian art canons, and you do all the things that you need to do. So it's not like the Persians rolled in and decided, no, this is Persian territory now, so we're doing everything according to Persian customs, which is something that they don't do to begin with. The Achaemenid Empire leaves relative freedom to people to worship and do as they will, as long as they pay taxes and give troops to the empire. And this also, I know, thanks to another podcast, which is the History of Persia podcast. That is the source of my knowledge of the Achaemenid Empire.
Amazing. Now I know what to
um,
listen to.
oh yeah, no, it's riveting. But yes, Egypt is not rule like it's not its own empire anymore. It is not as great as it was, let's say, 1,000 years before. It is diminished somehow. It has been like there has been like a resurgence period right before the Achaemenid conquest. The 26th dynasty with the capital in Sais, which is in the Delta, has reconquered Egypt, done great things. They've done a great PR work around the Mediterranean in trying to establish themselves again as like an international superpower. They trade, they send donations, fantastic donations to Greek sanctuaries and international sanctuaries, and among which and among these kings, there's like Amasis, who is in Herodotus. They start making they start producing art that is like reminiscent of the art of the great kings of the previous dynasties. They make scarabs with the cartouches of great kings of the past, which maybe is a way of saying, look, we are here now, so we're going to be just as good as them. At the end, it doesn't really work out, but it is a good period. And this is also the one on which Herodotus has like the strongest grasp
Hmm.
because it had just happened. Anything before that, let's just say it's a slightly less historically accurate. Let's put it this way.
I'm excited to hear some of the wild things he said too, because I feel like
Mm.
that's what I tend to hear most about Herodotus is like the absurd stuff he says.
Yeah. So at the beginning, he states his methodology. He's really trying to be as accurate as he can and as methodical as he
Hmm.
can. So he says, "Oh, so my methodology is verifying things, and I'm going to use hearsay from the Egyptian priests themselves, or from other Egyptians, or from other Greeks that live in Egypt. But I'm also going to use the literary tradition, the Greek literary tradition. So he's going to use, of course, Homer, because Homer
Hmm.
talks about Egypt. And he's going to use Anaximander and Hecataeus of Miletus, which were his direct predecessors in writing histories about Egypt. Hecataeus of Miletus had been to Egypt and he had been made fun of by the Egyptian priests, who were taking no prisoners. And Herodotus also makes fun of him for having been made fun of by the Egyptian priests. And he's trying to be rigorous in his scholarship. The problem is that his scholarship has a purpose. He's not writing an ethnographic treaty for the sake of it. He is writing because he wants to verify Greek traditions. So probably he's asking leading questions to the priests.
Hmm.
He's also writing to illustrate and confirm the Greek moral universe in which he's saying his tales, he's spinning his tale, and how the world works, which is how the Greeks want it to work. And many motivations and characters are a little too conveniently consistent with his themes. So there's so his methodology is like very clear, very open, but the goal behind it is, an agenda, if that makes sense.
Yeah. So if he's like born in Halicarnassus, traveling to Egypt for all of this, like do we know where he gets this desire to emulate the Greeks so specifically? Like he
Well, so that part of the Persian Empire had been Greek before it was Persian,
Oh, okay, so
because
it was
that's
like
the one that starts the
Hellenized.
Ionian. Yeah, yeah. So the Ionian revolt is there.
Well, if it had been Hellenized before, and then and then they were Persians, and then he's growing up in this world that's Hellenized but is Persian, like that makes sense where that kind of background is coming from. And yeah, that
Yeah,
that makes sense to me.
he's
We don't need
also
to say
he's also writing in Greek, and Greek is his first language,
right. Yeah, yeah. So it's just
which
a very Greek place for being under the Persian Empire at that time. I get it.
exactly,
Yeah.
exactly. But the problem of the language also opens up several questions about how he's interviewing Egyptians,
Yeah.
because there's the reason for the Egyptian priests to be speaking Greek, especially not the Egyptian priests in down in the country. So they may have used interpreters, and I mean, God knows what they understood, what they told each other. It's always a matter. And in some places, you can, like, he says, "Oh, this is what I understood from what the priests were telling me." So there's some concerns there about things getting lost in translation. As a bilingual person, I would, I know that sometimes you want to say A and then B comes out and it sounds weird. So the bigger thing that he is doing with his Egyptian logos, which is Egyptian, books, is trying to prove that many of the things that the Greeks have come from Egypt, because Egypt, as we know, was held in very high regard from the Greeks because it was a very ancient civilization. They were revered as doctors, priests, magicians, slightly orientalistic. I mean, I hear Edward Said rolling in his tomb, but they were held in very high regard. So Herodotus is trying to prove that like many things that the Greeks were doing well are coming from Egypt, including the gods, which is one big thing, because sometimes when people read book 2, he's using the Greek names of the Greek names of gods to indicate Egyptian gods, but that's not because he's trying to make it easier for his readers. He's actually saying these are the same gods.
Interesting. That's so interesting, and it's funny because I fairly recently covered Memnon and then just generally myths from Greece that were about Africa, and just the way that it's specifically with Egypt, you can tell in so much of Greek mythology that they wanted to connect themselves with this incredible civilization that was so much older than them. And and I think I used what I think is a good example in that episode of just imagining being a Greek in that time, and you go somewhere and the pyramids are so much older than you, and imagining exploring a place where you barely have, you've got your temples, but if you're talking really early in Greece, the temples are nothing compared to the pyramids, and you're seeing this place and you're like, oh my god, holy shit, who are these people? Well, if Greeks are anything, we must have some connection to them. So I just always love the myth of Io, right? Io goes down and she travels all around, and then she has a family down there, and then they go back up to Greece, and you're like, okay, well, that's your way of saying not only are the Egyptians more ancient and impressive, but they were Greek first.
Yes,
the Egyptians are actually Greek, and I just love the way they kind of bend over backwards to have that kind of impressive backstory.
Yeah, he's really, really trying. And with the gods, it's fantastic because the lengths to which he goes to try to fit several Greek gods onto to map them onto Egyptian gods. Sometimes it doesn't quite work.
No, their gods are so different.
Yeah, he has a list. I'm like, oh well, Amun is Zeus. And I'm like, okay, well, he's technically the head of the pantheon, but Amun is not a sky god. He's the hidden one. He's the god. You're like, okay, well, that's fair. And Amun has the ram horns, and Zeus sometimes has the ram horns. Okay, I can see that. Hathor and Aphrodite, that's okay. Fertility goddesses, sex, drugs, happiness, music. Okay, that I can see that. Then when you get to Neith is Athena, it's yes, a warrior goddess, that's fair, but Neith is not a goddess of crafts. She's really a warrior. Questionable. Rise Helios, that's fine, the sun god and everything else. And then you get Isis is Demeter. No.
Why?
No.
Yeah, I don't see that.
No, that doesn't really work. And nothing against Demeter. Isis is the great of magic. She's one of the most powerful, if not the most powerful, Egyptian goddess. She knows the secret name of Ra. She can control him because she knows the secret name. And Demeter is really not that.
No, she's important, but in her own way, of earthy
right. And
way.
the similarity is from the story of Isis going around the earth to try and gather the pieces of her husband. Which fair, Demeter does that, but just to find her daughter. But then he conveniently ignores the rest of the story and the rest of what Isis is, and the fact that her child is not a daughter but a son. So it gets complicated. Even Osiris and Dionysus. Yes, Osiris gets killed and then is kind of reborn, but he's still a mummy and he's still in the underworld. He's the ruler of the underworld. So by those standards, he should be Hades, but he's not.
That is, yeah.
See what I'm getting at? It's complicated.
Osiris as Dionysus is I don't get that at all. Just Egypt is so interesting because you can make other, like, obviously there's a lot of connections between gods across the Mediterranean, but it is harder to map them onto Egypt than it is even to map like Phoenician gods and like an Assyrian gods onto Greek. Like they fit better than the Egyptian ones do, at least in my limited knowledge. But
They
like,
do.
yeah.
And the other issue with Egypt is that like every province or city has its own very specific gods. There are
Mm,
so many. There are so many. And sometimes he takes a very specific god from like a smaller province and makes it into, a larger one. And that doesn't really work. Or he takes a goddess that is relatively important because she's one of the two ladies that signify Egypt, like she's the goddess Wadjet and she's a snake, and he says, "Oh yeah, she's Leto." And why? How
yeah.
did you get there? How did that happen? And of course, he tries to fit in Greek mythological figures and heroes, but he has
Right.
to kind of make them into gods. So he says, oh, clearly Epaphos, who is the son of Aios, clearly the Apis bull, which was a relatively new cult in Egypt at the time. Relatively new, like a millennium. Relatively new in Egyptian.
In the Egyptian, yeah, no other culture.
Yeah, in Egyptian times. Or he's trying to say that Heracles is clearly Egyptian and he's the god Khonsu, but Khonsu is a lunar god, and yes, he's a warrior, but he's mostly a lunar god, and he's a god. He's not a hero. So he's trying to make these, or Perseus. He says, oh, he's probably the god of Akhmin, but the god Min is clearly not Perseus. He I was about to say something vulgar. I'll say this and then we'll cut it. He has something long and jutting, and it's not a sword. He's an Ithyphallic god. So he's trying to make these things, but he really wants to make this connection and to cram in the Homeric tradition into the
Right.
chronology of mythology of Egypt.
Yeah. Do you want me to cut that out? It was a good joke.
We'll think about it.
There's way worse on my podcast, that's all.
Surely. No, Min is a very Ithyphallic fertility god, and
Mm,
when the Christians were trying to erase some of the gods, or at least the worst parts of the gods, they chiseled out just his erect penis, but now it's even more visible on the wall, on the temple walls, because that's the only part that chiseled out. Is like
right.
that is not the win you thought it would be.
Oh,
Yeah, it backfired somehow. Anyways, so no, back to Homer. So he's trying to put in the Homeric tradition into Egyptian history. So he's taking literary figures and trying to make them into real figures, which is not unusual, but it's not as graceful because he's trying to work out the Egyptian chronology following the literary tradition that gives dates for the Trojan War. And so he crams in what's the name, Proteus, in between kings, because he's like, well, this is when we know the Trojan War took place, so clearly this is where this king would have fit in Egyptian history, which is not how history works.
yeah. Yeah. I mean, it's just that sort of I suppose it kind of almost fits with like the notions generally behind like pseudo archaeology. You're like, I have this point, I want to prove it. So I'm going to take my preconceived point and I'm going to nestle it in to actual history and just decide that it fits there because I want it to.
Yes, he's really trying, and like he makes like a really good, like, solid reasoning with chronology. The problem is that the chronology is off.
Right.
There's no chronology because Proteus never existed, and he's cramming it in there with real people. So that's kind of an issue.
Any chronology based on the Trojan War is going to have an issue.
It's several.
Yeah.
Um, but he's trying to identify, where Menelaus and his people landed, and where Paris and Helen landed. But this is also interesting because Euripides has not written Helen yet.
Right.
So this must have been an earlier tradition that he somehow caught, and tried to work it into his digression about Egypt, which is very interesting. probably, I don't know if it was because he just wanted, to prove once more that Egypt was connected to Greece, or if he just thought that was cool and that Proteus needed to be an Egyptian pharaoh and he had to put it into the list of kings. One also has to wonder if his question, because for anything that he says, like, oh, and the priest told me this and that, so one has to wonder if he literally asked the priest, oh, do you know of this tradition? And they were like, yeah, sure, whatever.
Right.
And
He's like, it's proof. It's true.
yeah, it is absolutely true. And they were like, yes, sure, it is 100%. Yes, excellent. But he's fun, and he's trying. So the division of the book, because I realize now that, like, I'm talking about this book like everyone knows how it's divided. It's okay, so let me go back. So the first part, he's talking about ethnography, anthropology, religion, daily life, social classes, all sort of things. And then the second part, he's getting straight into history and chronology, getting it wrong for some ways. Like the main periods in which Egyptologists divide the history of Egypt is there, but he misses the pyramids builders by, like, I don't know, a few millennia. Somehow, easy to overlook.
Sure, yeah.
I mean, and then he's much better at history that was like a century old than anything before that. But his observations about the country are fantastic and wild. The thing that always struck me the most, and actually the first thing we translated in high school about Herodotus, is when he says, oh, Egyptian men and women behave completely opposite to how Greek men and women behave. And then he proceeds to list a lot of things that somehow are absolutely contradicted by art history and archaeology and what we know. He has ideas. He says, oh, the man, like, everyone relieves themselves inside instead of outside, which, okay, fair. I mean, they had chamber pots and everything else. That's okay. Women pee while standing and men crouch. You're like, first of all, why did you feel the need
Like, why? Yeah.
to include this? Second of all, okay. Then he talks about, how they carry weight when they go to the market, and he misses. Then he talks about using the loom. Certainly true for his period, but it was not always the case. He's making a lot of weird claims that are easily disputed by simply looking at the art or reading texts. He has ideas. He tries to put in, like, some, for instance, some taboos about food, but he gets the taboo right, but for the wrong reasons. So he's like, oh, they don't eat fava beans because, like, in the Pythagorean doctrine, they are impure, and that's actually not true. One of the commentaries says, oh, fava beans that were probably considered impure, not because of the Pythagorean doctrine, but because they cause gas. And so you don't want to eat them, especially if you're a priest and you have to present yourself to the god every day, which makes sense. You wouldn't want to, pass gas in front of your god. He is absolutely spot on the fact that there are many, 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 many animals being worshipped. He gets that right. What he gets absolutely wrong is the description of several animals. So let's get into that. So he talks about crocodiles, and he says, "Oh, they're giant lizards." Okay, fair enough. They're
Sure.
big reptiles. They're evil and mean, and they get they get hunted by hanging like an animal on the prow of a boat, and then you catch the crocodile. And you wouldn't really want to catch a crocodile, but we have representations of people hunting crocodiles for that, so that works. Then he goes into hippos, and I don't know. I don't know. He describes something that has hooves, a snout like a horse, a mane, fangs, a tail, and makes the sounds of a horse.
I've got so many questions.
I've many questions. We know that he takes this description from Hegatius of Miletus, who clearly had never seen a hippo in his life.
Mm-hmm.
However, first of all, hippos were there at the time.
Like in Egypt, you mean?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. And they were, even if you are very cautious and you don't want to go meet a hippo in person, which is advisable because hippos are the devil, as we know from many streams of Assassin's Creed Origins, they are very common in art because the hippo is an animal of the god Set, which is the god of, let's say, the god of chaos, but several caveats and
Mm.
asterisks there. But also, female hippos are the incarnation of the goddess Tauret, who is a protectress of pregnant women. So she is a standing pregnant hippo with a wig and knives who protects pregnant women.
Well, that's incredible.
So the question is, how did he never see the representation of a hippo? Or maybe he saw it and made the connection but didn't have the right word for it?
Yeah. Well, and my initial thought was like something around the word itself, which is one of my
Right.
favorite ancient Greek two English words of river horse.
Hmm.
So maybe it's like more like because it sounds like what he's describing is more like a river horse versus
Yes,
an actual
literally.
hippopotamus.
Right. So, but then maybe he saw like the representation of these chunky units of animals and did not ask what they were.
Yeah.
Did not make the connection. It is somewhat weird. And some people also say that he has never, like, he never actually went to Egypt.
Mm.
And that's why he gets so many things wrong, but I think he gets so many of them right, if by his weird interpretation, that I don't see why not. I mean, he does get right the snakes. He says that there are vipers with horns. Very true. I mean, they don't have horns. They're like little things on their
Oh,
heads, but in
yeah.
writing, they actually have little horns. He talks about winged serpents, which is another favorite. Flying serpents with wings. And many possible explanations for this one. There are winged serpents in art, which is fair. Cobras have the hood that they flare.
Right.
And I've learned, to my horror,
Oh
that
God.
some serpents actually jump. They fling
Ugh.
themselves.
Ugh.
So
No.
probably that. Is that he got right. He has a whole thing about some weird fishes. Once again, why Herodotus? Why he says, "Oh, these fishes eat the eggs, and so they try to kill each other." He observes something that happens, but it's not what he thinks. He thinks that the male fishes are eating the eggs and then trying to kill the babies. When actually, for this type of fish, and I went into a horrible Google dive, the the eggs actually end up in the mouth of the female, and they just stay there until they hatch. So he observed something and got it wrong. Can't
Right.
hold it against him.
I just love the curiosity inherent in all of this, where somebody's, and I mean, I'm sure it's just also like a matter of existing in the ancient world versus now when we have so many answers. But
Mhm.
like, I just want that curiosity of like going around and looking at things and being like, why does this happen? Like, why does that fish have eggs in its mouth? Why is this serpent
Yes.
flying? Like, I just love that idea. It's so precious.
Yeah, no, he really, like, and some of these touches are like true enough to like make me think that he really went and observed.
Mm.
I have to wonder what the Egyptian thought about him,
Yeah.
because he might have been around asking weird questions and asking leading questions, and they might have been like, "Yeah, sure, whatever you say." But he's very curious. He's always asking why, and he's always trying to offer an explanation for things. Sometimes he sees. Here's the problem. So his sources are not historians, right? The Egyptian priests do not make history. They
Hmm.
record whatever it is that they need to record for theological reasons or for propaganda. And so many times the explanations that he gives are either theological explanations or straight up Egyptian propaganda that he's eating up and he doesn't even realize. So when he talks about the phoenix, that's a theological thing. The phoenix is the Bennu bird, and he's Osiris. but he
Mm.
looks like a real bird that lives in Egypt. So he's not catching the theological part of the bird, and he's taking it at face value. Says, "Oh, you clearly have a bird that actually is born, is reborn from his ashes." Or or when he talks about animal worship, he gets many things right, but other he gets wrong. When he talks about the apis bull, he's saying, "Oh, the priests are checking out these animals that they want to sacrifice because they need to be pure enough." And actually, no, they're probably checking that they're not sacrificing a bull that could be the incarnation of the apis. So he's observing stuff, but he's really missing the religious substratum of many things that he's seeing, or misses it. Like he talks about dying by crocodile or drowning, and he says, "Oh, the people who are eaten by crocodiles and or drown are made into gods," and that's not how it works, right? How it works is that in the 10th hour of the night, the god Horus goes down to the underworld and lifts up the people who have drowned or have been eaten by crocodiles to bring them to the afterlife because they haven't had a proper burial. So
Mm.
he's not getting it completely wrong, but he's still missing something, which is infuriating, but also very endearing.
Yeah, it sounds like it just probably also all comes down to, like, if he did go to Egypt, then his biggest issue was that he didn't speak Egyptian. So he didn't get to
Right.
ask the follow-up questions, right? Like, he had one or two questions, and then he based all of his studies off of that versus, like, actually asking multiple questions and getting more details. Like, I mean, it sounds like it would be pretty easy to sort out, like, oh, you mean not all of these birds are born from their ashes? It's just
Mhm.
this one story and it looks like this actual bird? Or yeah, like, wait, wouldn't that make for a lot of gods if everyone who drowned or was eaten by a crocodile ended up a god? Like, I think I'm missing something here. Why don't I drill down and get some details?
Exactly. But like for some things, he's really not catching. Or like when he talks about religion, he misses completely how it is practiced. He
Mm.
talks about big concepts and everything else. He has a vague idea of what one of the Egyptian pantheon looks like, and he tries to make several of the gods into the 12 Olympians, but these are like the 8 gods of one particular province, to which he
Mhm.
adds 3 because, well, 4 because he has to get to 12, but that's not for all of Egypt. So he's missing out on some things, and he has zero awareness of like why the rituals are performed the way they are. So for instance, mummification, right? For
Mm.
like, if you open any book about mummification, you will find a lot of his writing, and then the Dorsiculus
Oh.
about mummification. But uh, that's not how it's not that simple, because it's, oh, there are 3 tiers of mummification. The first one is, you make a cut and then you remove this and that, and then you clean it, cut it, sew it back on, and wrap the person, and then off you go. And then the second one, this is going to get really gross. um
Please, I love mummification.
Fantastic. Yeah, I wish I could say the same. I don't.
I mean, I don't want to get mummified, but it's also interesting.
It is interesting.
I might have seen the movie The Mummy like a comfortable 200 times since it came out. So
Not the new one, I hope.
no, gods no.
Oh, okay. Thank
No,
you.
no.
Oh, Lord.
1999. I'm sure I watched it
Yes.
on day 1 and I've been watching it ever since.
That is a great classic, which
It's
has
such a good
more
movie.
accurate things than you would expect.
I'm glad to hear that.
I'm also a fan.
Good.
So he says, wait, what? Oh, yeah. The second one is, you basically, how to say? You inject a substance inside the person, and then you plug them, and then you wait, and then when you pull the plug, all the insides come out. I really don't have. I don't think my English is good enough to express this in a more
I mean,
refined manner.
that was pretty good. That's pretty
And the
disgusting.
third one, and the third one, you get like maybe a sheet, like a shroud, and then you get yeeted into the desert in a hole, and the desert preserves you. He's making it very simple. He's also making it unnecessarily, tiered. We
Yeah.
know that not everyone who was rich was mummified the same way. We know that the techniques changed toward, in different time periods. He doesn't seem to really understand why the bodies need to be preserved, which is once again him not understanding the theological part, because the body, and that's oh my, that's related to another big thing that he really really misses. He says that the Egyptians are the inventors of the theory of metempsychosis, which is reincarnation. No,
Mm.
absolutely wrong. Like that's probably like the biggest mishap, more than displacing the pyramids by like several millennia, because that's, I mean, you can kind of understand why. I'll get to that. But like with the reincarnation, he says, "Oh, the Egyptians invented metempsychosis." And it's like, no, there's nothing more wrong for Egyptian doctrine, because you have five. There are five parts to a person. There's the name, there's the body, there's the spirit, there's the what we can call vital force, and then there's the magic.
Mm.
And you are complete if all of those survive in this life and the next one, which is why you need the body to be preserved, and you want your name to be preserved, which is why you write your name on fucking everything, and outside of your tomb. And that's why when someone needs to be erased
Yeah.
because they've done something unspeakable, you erase their name, so you really hope that they will be annihilated in the afterlife and they will not survive. And Herodotus completely misses that. But like, and also with this conception of only having like one, let's say one life, you understand that metempsychosis is not possible because you can't reincarnate. You are one, and that's all there is,
Yeah.
right?
That's so interesting. I didn't know any of that about Egypt, so now I'm just taking that all in. Um,
Do I have reading recommendations?
I love it. No, I mean, if I'm ever going to move on from Greek broadly in the podcast, it's going to be into Egyptian because it's the only other one I really care about. Um, but I like basically haven't learned more about it since I was young. But that's so lovely. I didn't realize that it's all about everything else can survive, but you have to keep the body.
Mhm.
Like,
Yes.
yeah.
Yes.
Oh, that's
You
lovely.
really need to. And that's also why the body's protected. And if you have some missing parts from a certain period onwards, you get a substitute, let's say.
Mm.
So when certain parts are missing, if you're very rich, you can get like a gold replica of them. If not, you can use wood or other stuff. And also the whole body is covered in amulets, and they're very specialized. So you have
Mm.
one for the heart, you have some for the limbs, and one to give you a voice, and one to preserve your spirit. It's like it's a whole process. It's not just cutting someone, getting the things out, you know closing them, and then off they go. It has a ritual. I can't believe I'm saying this word. It has a ritual meaning that he kind of he doesn't get it.
Yeah. Well, it'd be hard because when you come from a world that is so completely different, like
Mhm.
the Mediterranean has a lot of similarities, except Egypt stands out in a lot of really interesting ways, like mummification and everything to do with that. But yeah, if you're not in a position to like wrap your head around something that's so completely different from the life you lead, you come up with all these bizarre explanations or simplifications instead.
Yes, he's simplifying some things also because he's trying to make them fit into his worldview,
Mhm.
so they have to make sense for what he's trying to prove with his writing. So he's trying to cut down, and make it more simple, and sometimes he ends up making it more Greek, like when he talks about warriors. They're kind of too similar to the Spartans.
Mm.
So he's not really spot on there. Or when he talks about the priests, he says, oh, every god has like 7,000 priests, but like they only worship one god, and so you're only specializing in one god. True for some. He says there are no female priestesses, which is, so for the Greek conception of what a priestess would be, yes, he's right.
Mm.
For the Egyptian idea of what a woman might do in a temple, he's wrong, because we know that there are people who are like chantresses for the gods, and they are, they are adoring the god. So there is this one priestess who is like the god's wife of a moon, who is basically a high priestess of a moon. And he has a sort of like a whole lot of duties that the males cannot fulfill. Because they're also related to, the fertility of the god and all sort of weird things going on with the statue of the god. But he's kind of missing some of these. And he also divides, and this is a big thing, he kind of divides society into layers, but he doesn't seem to understand that someone could be many things at once. So like even in many history books, when you see the group of the scribes, but a scribe is almost never only a scribe, because many noblemen are general of these, overseer of these, royal scribe. So it's not like a profession, it's more of a title. And he's kind of not getting the sense that many of these titles can overlap in the same person. Even among priests, you can have someone who is, the second prophet of these and also working as something else, or someone who is, the chief of seers of this god, and then he's also doing something else. And he seems to have weird ideas about priestly practices, in terms of like they need to abstain from this and that and everything else. I was like, yes, but they're not in service for the whole year. So they need to abstain from sex, for instance, like when they're in service, but they're not in service for the whole year. They're doing like a month, 3 months, everything else. But like many things are lost on him. I wonder what these priests were telling him, to be fair.
I like the idea that maybe they were just fucking with him.
I love the idea. They did fuck with Herodotus, because he went there, and this is Herodotus telling us. So he's kind of throwing shade. He tells us that Herodotus of Miletus went there to do ethnography, botany, and everything else, and myths, and cartography, and geography. And he told the Egyptian priests, my, 6th generation ancestors were gods. And the priest opened the door to a room that was full of statues of priests up to, the 30th generation. They're like, these were all men, children of men, so you're saying bullshit. And Herodotus was just like, yeah, that's it, owned, and left. And this is Herodotus telling us. So he's not trying to claim that his ancestors were gods, but he still tells us that gods did walk in Egypt at the very beginning of their story, which is 100% Egyptian propaganda, and he's just eating that up. He's hearing that, and he's like, yeah,
totally checks out. This place is magical. So what other kind of, or are there other good examples of stuff that's just straight Egyptian propaganda versus him just misunderstanding everything?
I mean, yes. So when he starts talking about pharaohs, he has a few. So he changes all the names because he says the names in Greek. So we have to interpret he's talking about. So he talks about, Sesostris, which is Ace and Wazret. Which one? There were several. We don't know. One of the, probably the third one, because of what he says. And then Moeris, which is Amunemhat. And then he changes, and then he's the one who gives us Cheops, Kephren, and Mykarinos for the names of the pyramid builders, which are like his kind of okay transliterations of like the phonetic rendition of the names of the pharaohs. So that's good. And sometimes you can see the Egyptian propaganda like coming out and slapping you in the face, like he's saying, Sesostris conquered up to Scythia, and then down to Kush, and then he went all over the place. And this is like a double layer propaganda, because on the one hand, we know that Senwosret III was really big on his own propaganda, because he went to Nubia, he did conquer, and then he built these giant ass fortresses on the border, on the Nile, to prove that was his territory. And he put up stelae everywhere with him trampling over the enemy. Well, every pharaoh did, but he was like really big on that. And his name was associated with like this, like the myth of this like great warrior, great conqueror. However, he never went past, the northern borders of Egypt. So where did he get that from? And the general idea in the scholarship is that the Egyptians kind of made that up to prove that he had been bigger than the Achaemenids, who never conquered
Mm.
Scythia, right? They went to
Right.
try to conquer, and then they never did. And then once Alexander rolled in and he had actually conquered more, then of course they wanted to claim him as one of their own and the heir to these big pharaohs. So he's taking all this propaganda, like when he talks about Rampsinitus, which is Ramesses. Pick your Ramesses because there's like 11 of them building all over Egypt and doing this and doing that. And it's like, that sounds like Ramesses II, who did exactly that. He was a great PR man. So he's reading this. And also, interestingly, he's also reading the unfavorable Egyptian propaganda on some of the kings.
Oh.
So he's getting the tea and he's dishing it out in Greek. So when he talks about Cheops, there's a whole tradition that depicts him as a tyrant, as a
Mm.
terrible man. And he absolutely repeats that when he talks about, I think it's Mykerinus, and he has like a smaller pyramid. And that like he has like a favorable reputation in later Egyptian sources. So he says, oh, he built like smaller pyramids because he had lost his daughter, and so he decided to build smaller pyramids to remember them. Or when he talks about, and he gets into one of his favorite topics, which is prostitution, when he talks about Cheops not having enough blocks of limestone for his pyramid, and so he forces his daughter to become a prostitute, and she asks for money and limestone blocks for each of her customers. And this is like, where did he get this from, right? Or he tells like a weirdly Greek with Egyptian undertone tales of like a proto Cinderella, of someone who loses a sandal, and an eagle grabs it and brings it to Pharaoh, and Pharaoh searches the whole land for this woman's sandal, and then he marries her.
Oh my god.
He's merging together like some very like Egyptian literature tropes, and then Greek folk tales. Or like he tells a lot of things that you read them and you're like, this is a folk tale. This is not propaganda. This is not stuff. So like brothers like betraying each other and killing each other. The tale of the two brothers that are stealing together. One of them is trapped, and the other one, to not have his brother identified, chops off the brother's head and runs away with it. It's a whole of weirdness. He has like all this information that comes from all sort of propaganda and biographies, and also like some didactic literature that he kind of misinterprets. There's one passage in which he says, oh, when they have banquets, they have little miniature coffins with a dead man inside, a fake dead man, like the model of a dead man, and like a sign that says, remember to enjoy life now because you're going to be like me. The thought is in line with Egyptian literature, because we have plenty of poems that say, live now because when you're dead, you're not coming back, and you're not going to enjoy anything. But that doesn't mean that they would have little, memento mori coffins at banquets. So he had learned something from the literature, and then probably seen something and put two things together that really did not go together. But I love him. He's
I mean,
fantastic.
that is morbid as hell. I would love if that was true. Like, that is just so over the top and like dramatic in the best possible way.
He really has the flair for drama. There's another story about a cow. So I think it's once again Mykerinos's daughter, who knows that she has to die, and she asks to be put into this basically sarcophagus shaped like a cow, and to be brought back out to see the light of the sun once a year. And you're like, wait, what did he see that made him jump to that conclusion?
Yeah.
And this is probably one of the Osiria festivals of Koyak, which is a festival of how do you say it, of like when the crops are ready and you just harvest them. Harvest. There we go.
Yep.
And they would take out a statue of the goddess Hathor in her shape of a cow and bring it out,
Mm.
or or something of the sort. So he has some notions of Egyptian literature, like especially about older kings, more ancient kings. But then he has this tendency to put it together in weird ways and mixing folktale things and Greek moral teachings, which are very different from Egyptian moral teachings.
Now I can't get over why he would say Isis is Demeter instead of Hathor. Like, is Hathor better connected to Aphrodite?
Yes.
Yeah.
And she's also connected to Astarte
Okay.
and Ishtar. She's like a very, yeah, she's a heavily fertility related goddess. And she also appears as a cow, which would make also sense with Demeter because Demeter appears as a Tauropolos. So she's like
Mm-hmm.
on a bull. But then again, I mean, Hathor for Aphrodite makes more sense. Although, and this is where he really like the so in Egypt there were temples to Aphrodite, especially at the time that he visits. We know that there's a big temple to Aphrodite in Naucratis, which is a Greek city in Egypt,
Mm.
in the Delta, and that's where like he really knows what he's talking about. And so they knew Aphrodite, but they did not really identify her with Hathor in
Mm-hmm.
there because the dedications are all in Greek to Aphrodite.
Mm-hmm.
So, but I mean, I see where the fertility goddess pipeline goes, but the Isis Demeter is most probably because of the underworld situation. Although Isis
Yeah.
like
It's
only really
smart.
deals with the underworld when her husband is chopped to pieces.
Yeah, and Demeter only deals with it when she's searching for her daughter, but she doesn't go there. Like, she notably doesn't go
Right.
there. So, yeah,
Right.
that's so interesting. I mean, and I guess it all comes down to the very nature of like, they can't be equated because they are very different goddesses
They're
all
very different
across the
goddesses.
board. But it is just so interesting thinking about that because, like, because technically Demeter is also a fertility goddess. She's just like a less traditional, like a less sex fertility goddess and a more like
Yes.
earth fertility goddess. But yeah,
Yeah,
we
and
don't have to.
he also puts Isis also as like Selene, as like the
Mm.
moon, which is not entirely correct because the moon is a man. I mean, in
Yeah.
Egypt, the it's a moon god and not a moon goddess, and also, which is another thing that really sent Greeks in a loop. The Earth is male and the sky is female.
Mm. Very different.
Yeah. And this must have looked weird to them, but for the Egyptians, it did make sense because the fertilizer is the man, and so the earth being really fertile clearly is a man, and also sometimes the sky goddess is said to give birth to the sun god every morning, which is why the sky is red. So they had
Mm.
a good explanation for that, but he's kind of missing this. He does get, however, the good connection he makes is like Hephaestus is Ptah of Memphis, which is like spot on because Ptah is a craftsman. He
Mm.
is the one who makes, well, in one of the many traditions, he makes humans.
Mm.
Um, and he is, I mean, he's not a blacksmith, but he works things, and he's the craftsman god. So that one's like, yeah, that one he got right. That was easy. Uh, but, but he's not. But he's not the unwanted child of anyone, and he's actually in a somewhat happy marriage with the lion-headed goddess, and their son is a lotus flower. So it's a good
Mm.
family. It's a happy family. Uh,
Very
unlike
unlike
Hephaestus.
Hephaestus. Yeah.
Yes.
Not a happy
Yes.
family. Oh, I just find it so interesting just the ways in which the Egyptian gods are so
Mhm.
different and so unique and like just the animal nature of all of them too is so different from kind of so many other of the regions. They're generally just so extra fascinating, which I'm sure you agree because you
I,
study
I
Egyptology.
I do. I've studied these things. Like, and probably like if I had gone there as a as a Carian in the 5th century, I would have also been very taken aback by the fact that they did worship things. Oh my God, we need to talk about the cats. So
Please.
how did I forget the cats? So Greeks did not have cats at this point.
Mm.
So he goes and he sees these these weird animals that are worshipped, and he gets rightfully the sense that Egyptians were bonkers about them. So he tries to he tries to explain how the cats behave. He kind of fails, and then and then he says that when there's a great fire, the cats jump into the fire, and the Egyptians jump into the fire after the cats because they're so valuable. Not untrue. That they would probably jump into the fire for their cats. However, I don't think cats would jump in.
Yeah, seems unlikely.
It seems unlikely. Like they would probably just cause the fire and then run, and then leg it.
Yeah.
But he gets it that he's fascinated by these animals, which I mean, they're very important for the Egyptians because they eat the rats, which were an
Mm,
absolute plague when you have grain, when your whole economy is based on grain,
right.
or when you have poisonous snakes or like snakes that are, they're not deadly, but like they're really unpleasant. You want these animals to be on your good side, and they've had them for like ages. And Herodotus is like absolutely fascinated by these people's love for the cats. And then he also talks about other animals, they're like that they use to fight snakes and rats. He talks about ichneumons, which are kind of mongoose. I think they're the kind of mongoose, but sometimes, and this sends me in a rage, on museum labels or like in books, just like, oh, and these are river otters. Like, no, they're not otters. These are mongoose. Uh,
Interesting. I don't know
they're
anything about mongoose, but
they are think Timon, but like
oh,
Egyptian,
okay.
and like slightly chunkier. And then they're like other. I think ichneumons are of the like yeah, they're called Egyptian mongoose, and they're like they really don't look like otters, but in art, unfortunately, they kind of look like river otters.
Hmm.
And some of them have like the solar disc on them and everything else. And he's fascinated by all these weird animals. He's absolutely taken with the fact that they worship them, that they
Hmm.
worship the crocodiles, and sometimes they dress them up and spoil them. They
Wait,
wear, I mean,
well, explain.
how do you dress up a crocodile? Well,
Yes.
um, so in certain cities, there was a cult of the crocodile god Sobek, and we are told that they would have like let's say sacred crocodiles that they would feed, probably in like canals or like basins linked to the temples or sacred enclosures. Some crocodile mummies have holes drilled where the ears in theory should be if you were looking at
Mm.
a human face. And so people have hypothesized that maybe they were putting earrings on the crocodiles. Now, did the crocodiles like that? I find that hard to believe. Would a crocodile let you put earrings on them? I also find it hard to believe. But maybe. But they were spoiling them and feeding them, which is something they did. And in other nomoi, they had sacred rams and or other sacred animals. And he is absolutely fascinated by these. The word that he uses to describe most of Egypt is Soma, which is the I think it's the Doric version of Talma, which is like a wonder.
No.
He's all in for it. It's like this place has most wonders than any other place on earth. And he's also ready to believe some things that are not true, but they are propaganda about like how things are built. So he sees Lake Moeris, and somehow he understands, and we don't know if they tell him or if he understands that that was a man-made lake that a pharaoh had
Mm.
made. It's a giant lake. It's not man-made. But he's like, yes, totally, they totally did this. It's like 100%. I believe that. I buy into that. So he's buying this, and then he talks about the labyrinth, and you're like, the what, and it's like, yes, there's a labyrinth, and there's a pyramid on top of the labyrinth and everything else. And then when you look at it from an Egyptian archaeology perspective, you realize what it is. It's not a labyrinth, it's a tomb. It's a
Yeah.
big mortuary temple for the worship of Amenemhat III in the Fayum, and it has many rooms and many corridors and many other things. And then there's a pyramid, like not on top; it's like a little forward. But to someone who came with ideas,
Mhm.
labyrinth ideas, that would have looked like a labyrinth. So he's like absolutely making a mess out of things. He's describing some things that exist, but the how and why he gets kind of wrong. Same
Mhm.
for the pyramids. Or, the when he says how they were built, when he talks about other buildings, he's using Greek construction techniques and ascribing them to Egypt. Says, oh, they used cranes. And we're like, no, they did not have cranes when they were building the pyramids. Like, oh, they only used iron tools. And like, also wrong. They only had copper at the time. It works. It works. Experimental archaeology has proven that, yes, you can cut granite with copper and sand and a lot of patience.
Mm.
But they had patience and time. So he's, you know, he's trying his best. And then when finally he talks about Saitic Egypt, so from 664-ish onwards, then he's actually spot on with the history
Right.
and whatever happens. Then he's like talking about something that really happened. Anything before that, questionable. And he also talks, and this is the funniest cross reference that we have. He talks about the famous heterae, or if you prefer, prostitutes of Naucratis.
Mm.
And he mentions one of them called Rhodopis, so Rosy Cheeks, who was so rich and so famous that commissioned giant golden skewers to be put in Delphi on her name. And he also tells us that this is the same courtesan that Sappho's brother had freed and spent all of his money on. And we have the fragment of Sappho insulting Aphrodite and asking her to bring back her brother because he's squandering all his money on a prostitute from Naucratis. So
Oh, that's so fun.
so he's getting the ancient tea, kind of
Yeah.
getting it right. It's possible that someone from Naucratis dedicated the skewers, but then he also adds that she was freed, I think, along like Zopus, who was also enslaved, and that's like totally bonkers. That's like not really. That's like another tradition that he weaves in. And so
Mm.
he takes something that is like that happened, which is what Sappho tells us happened, and then he puts it on top of something that was real, which is that Naucratis, being a harbor, had a lot of prostitutes, and then he adds donations to Delphi, which is it's a trope in literature, right? We're told, I don't remember who it is, that Phryne, the famous Athenian
Mm.
hetera, wanted a statue of hers in Delphi, and she also offered to reconstruct the walls of Thebes if the Thebans had put the sign saying, "Oh, Alexander destroyed it," and Phryne rebuilt it, and they were like, "No, thank you." So
That would have been
like, thank
cool.
you.
Fine.
We'll pass on that, ma'am. But he's just mishmashing together all these various informations. And his portrayal of Egypt is fantastic and fabulous. But I would love to go back in time and be like a fly on the wall and see what the priests were thinking and saying.
Yes. Oh God, I feel that way about so many different things, but this might be a new one for sure.
Mhm.
But like, yeah, just the way these misinterpretations happen and what kind of was going on in people's minds and what were they saying and what were they already like had stuck in their head that they couldn't get rid of, so it just like it reinforced all their ideas. Or oh man, especially like I think this just makes me think that Odyssey really does Herodotus quite well, because he's just so
Mhm.
like I mean, he's always asking questions, but he's also just kind of like there, sort of existing and being slightly obnoxious, but in a fun way, kind of throughout.
Oh yeah, I mean, I'm sure. I'm sure. I don't know. I'm not that old, but like maybe real life Herodotus was like that.
Yeah.
He might have been chill dude. And like, I mean, it takes like a lot of intellectual curiosity and like also a good dose of guts to just travel to Egypt at that point and just try and ask. He probably didn't travel through the whole of it because he omits what is arguably like one of the biggest cities, which is Thebes. He talks about Thebes because he knows about Homer,
Mm.
but from the things that he omits, it's clear that he doesn't go there because like some of the biggest festivals in the Egyptian year were in Thebes, like the Festival of Opet and like the beautiful Festival of the Valley, which is a great festival of sex, drugs, rock and roll, and the dead, which
Amazing.
takes place down there. And he probably wasn't there for the whole year because he says, "Oh, it never rains in here." We know, no, it did rain, but he's probably not there for the time. But I'd like to believe that he went and he was just, yeah, trying to learn the things and saying fascinating and looking at things and
Yeah.
obnoxiously poking the priests and asking them, "But do you know about this tradition?" And they were like, "Yeah, sure, sure."
Sure, just go away. Yeah. I'll say
Yeah,
whatever you
yeah,
want.
please. Yeah, please. We need to
Yeah.
worship. Just go away. Just leave us alone.
It's interesting. Does he make like a lot of the connections between like Greek and Egyptian Thebes? Because I would think that if you're trying to like make these explicitly kind of Greek connections alongside Egypt, then Thebes is a really good example because I actually recently found myself, I've clearly like not been clear enough with my listeners because I had a listener ask me saying they'd heard of Thebes in Egypt. And was that wrong? Were they talking about the Greek one? And I was like, oh God, no, no, no. The Egyptian Thebes was way more important than the Greek one. Sorry if I've ever suggested otherwise.
Oh yeah.
Like, but yeah, it's just
Well,
so interesting because they have the two.
yeah, but he doesn't go there. He knows
Mhm.
about it.
Right.
And probably like the name Thebes is his version of one of the names of Luxor, which is Ta'ipet, which is the
Mm.
temple, because it's the temple. There are other interpretations, but this one, I mean, it makes sense. But he doesn't talk about it a lot because he stops in like Middle Egypt. He doesn't go in Upper Egypt.
Right.
And there's already a lot to do. And also his main interest in like the Homeric connection is with the Delta because of Helen
Right.
and Menelaus and Paris. He knows more or less where Egypt ends and like how far down it is, but he doesn't even go there, unfortunately. It would have been cool if he had
Yeah.
seen Thebes. He would have been impressed with Thebes.
Yeah.
And
Ugh.
I mean, God knows what he would have understood. But the Theban theology is complicated. Memphite theology is also complicated. Also, pet peeve, he doesn't learn or doesn't talk about one of the big creation myths, which is absolutely crazy, which is the one of the great honker. So at the beginning, there is the waters of the noon, the waters of the nothing, and then an egg comes out, and out of the egg comes the great honker, which is a goose, which is the sun god, who honks everything into existence. Um, and there is a beautiful figurine of these among Tutankhamun's grave goods, and it's amazing. I'm gonna send it. I'm gonna tweet it at you because it's
Please.
fantastic. The Great Honker. I mean, if they had told him, his mind would have exploded in honks,
Yeah.
probably.
Mine basically did. So that just makes me think too then, so the Egyptian name for Egyptian Thebes, that's a Greek name that we use now. Is that
Hmm.
right? Yeah.
Yes,
Which
yeah.
of
The
course.
Egyptian names for Thebes were Wazet.
Ah.
So which is why we're like kind of confused where he got Thebes from,
Mhm.
because the Egyptians did not call it Thebes. But then if
Yeah.
you think of like Ta'ipet, which is kind of close, but there's also the question about the name Egypt, right?
Right.
So where did he get that from? And this is something that I learned in high school first and then learned again because I had forgot about it. Probably he gets like the name Egypt, which oh, this is my throat telling me to stop. Comes from, so in Greek is like Aegyptos,
Mhm.
but and it's probably coming from the Egyptian name for the Temple of Time, Memphis, which is, now I don't want to mispronounce it, so I'm gonna look up the transliteration because otherwise the UCL is gonna revoke my my degree. Is Hutkapta. So
Hmm.
from Tahutkapta to Aegyptos, if it was not pronounced how I pronounced it, but it was like
Mhm.
slightly more aspirated and everything, chances are that the name Egypt comes from there.
Mhm.
So,
And then they wrote
and
it into their
also,
mythology.
oh yeah, yeah, yeah,
They were
yeah.
like,
We're just
"Io."
exactly. We're just regurgitating Egyptian propaganda and Greek propaganda.
Yeah. I love that bit of Greek propaganda, though. I could just keep talking about it because it's just so clearly an example of them being like, "These guys are really cool. We wanna be cool like them. How can we write it into our origin mythology that we are cool like the Egyptians?"
This is like the OG self-insert fan fiction.
Yeah, they're retconning Egyptian history to
Yeah.
just make the Greeks seem so much more cool. Yeah.
That's right.
It's
Yeah,
wonderful.
these are the same gods. And then I don't think it's him. I think it's Diodorus that says, "Oh, but actually the Egyptians worship animals because the Greek gods ran away and turned into animals and ran to Egypt. And so the Egyptians saw them and they were like, "Yes, we will worship these weird gods that are in shape of animals, but actually those are the Greek gods." So it turns
Oh
it
my
on
god.
its head.
That's amazing. Yeah, that's even more ridiculous. Like just really bending over backwards to make this
Mhm.
fit your narrative.
Oh yeah, 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 it's complicated. And the fact that some of the animals are like really not Greek makes it even funnier because like, oh, and Artemis became a cat. And like, you didn't have cats until like 100 years ago. What are you talking about?
Well, yeah, and like crocodiles and hippos, like those are not in
Mhm.
Greece.
Yeah, 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 yeah. He also Herodotus also talks about bears, which is somewhat of a weird thing. We know there were bears in the Near East, but not wild bears in Egypt. So maybe he was
Yeah.
told, maybe he saw them or representations, but
Yeah.
weird,
That is
weird. But
interesting. Yeah.
he must have had a ball with all these weird animals. He doesn't talk about
Oh
giraffes.
yeah. That's unfortunate.
Alas, well, giraffes were also imported, so maybe they were not importing them.
Mm. I've been learning modern Greek, and one of my favorite things to learn was that the word for Greek or for giraffe is just spotted camel.
It's Camelopardus in Latin.
Cameli
Yeah,
in
yes.
modern Greek, yeah. The
Yes,
spotted camel, and you're like, "Okay, I can see where you got this. You saw
I can
camels
see that.
first." Yeah,
Yeah,
you're like, "I'm familiar with camels." And then you see this big one. Sure. Does it have a super long neck? Yes. Maybe it's just freakish, but it sure
yeah,
does look like a spotted camel.
it does. Well, I mean, the name obelisk is like a big skewer, and you're like, yeah, yeah, I
Is
can
that
see
what it
that. Yeah,
That's great.
yes,
Yeah.
that is what it, and like and crocodile is a big lizard. You're like, well, that works. That works. A big
Leopard
murderous
is
lizard.
leopard is
Yeah,
spotted lion.
yeah,
Like,
that's true. That's true.
yeah.
And then there's the mystery of the hippo. So
Yeah.
who knows?
River horse that doesn't remotely resemble a river horse in any discernible
It's
way.
not a horse. It doesn't have hooves. It doesn't have a mane. It
It
doesn't have
just
hair. It's got the fangs, but like they're not really.
but
I
even
mean,
they're like
they're
and they're
tusks.
blunt. Yeah, they're not they don't even really look like fangs in the same way, you know? Like they look dangerous, but they don't look like sharp
Yeah, they
fangs.
are dangerous, but
Exactly,
yeah,
those things are terrifying, much
yeah,
like unlike horses. It's just so I love it.
exactly,
Yeah, and I
exactly.
just
Well,
it's gotta be the only English word that's like a direct Greek word too, of like this is direct two Greek words put together and then put into English because I think that's pretty rare that it doesn't even get adapted much. It's wonderful. Anyway, talk about etymology forever. This has been so much fun. Thank you for telling me everything about Herodotus in Egypt and all of his wild and wacky things. Like, I'm slowly transitioning into the podcast into like, what are the weirdest things from the ancient world? What are the most bizarre examples we have? Like, Alcestis started today on the podcast, a series on Alcestis,
oh, I can't
which
wait.
is oh my god, I had so much fun. I didn't know what it was when I started. I was just like, it's a Euripidean tragedy. And then I'm reading it and I'm like, no, it's not. What
No,
the
it's
fuck?
not. What is this? What is this? Also, Admetus suck. Anyways,
Oh my god, and meta sucks. Yeah. No, and
his is
I'm
bad.
soon on the podcast I'll be reading what else was I doing? Oh, I'm just doing the Batrachomyomachia
Batrachomyomachia, yes.
is coming next month. And then after that, I'm just doing a straight reading of Lucian's True History.
Yes.
So I'm just really like I'm having a great time on like what is the batshit stuff from the ancient world and let me share it with everyone.
The
So I feel like
weirdest
Herodotus
things.
fits really well in with this.
Yes, yes. So much for his attempts to be a historian. Well, he
Yeah.
tries.
Yeah. He made a valiant attempt. I mean, it was a different time. It would have been very hard to do much better than he does. Like, it would have been difficult.
It would have also been very hard to try and parse the Egyptian propaganda because they don't write down anything else. So they
Yeah.
just cancel kings and, conveniently forget defeats or turn draws into victories. I'm looking at you, Ramesses II. Um, so, his task was monumental. But yeah, apart from
Yeah.
the hippo, he kind of got some things.
I mean,
I
he had
just
fun
love
along
him.
the way.
Yeah. Oh, surely,
Yeah.
surely.
Oh my God, that's so wonderful. Well, I will let your throat have a rest and let you
Thank
go.
you.
But why don't you tell my listeners like where they can find more, or follow you if you want, or watch your streams and all that fun stuff?
Oh yeah, sure. Well, first of all, thank you for having me. And
Thank
I
you.
hope that like my giant ramble discussion about something that is equally as rambling made sense.
Absolutely. My favorite thing is just to get people rambling because I think it's just so much fun. Like, at least it is fun for me, and my listeners never complain. So I'm just assuming everyone loves it because it's
That's
truly
good, and
wonderful.
that's very easy to get me rambling. So I can be found, I can be spotted in my natural habitat on Twitter at Ammit with an underscore. So AMMIT_. Yes, that is the name of the Eater of Souls in ancient Egypt. Yes, that is
Mm.
also the name of, spoiler alert, the villain in Moon Knight. So my
I've been
girl is
meaning to watch
getting she's getting a bad rap. She
that.
has no agency. Anyways,
Oh.
and I stream for Save Ancient Studies Alliance, SASA, on Twitch every Friday at 2 p.m. Eastern Time. And that is so twitch.tv/Save Ancient Studies. We are doing an archaeogaming series. Right now, we are streaming Uncharted 4 with a bunch of archaeologists. The next game we're going to stream is going to be Heaven's Vault, which is a delightful game
Ooh.
that has to do with Egypt and sci-fi and deciphering things. And then for the next installment, I think after the fall, we have to start Tomb Raider because it is necessary.
Oh.
Like archaeogaming 101. Um,
Yeah.
yeah, and I think that is everywhere I am.
I mean, that's great. Twitch stuff is so fun. I've never because I just never been in that world. Like I thought I would have trouble watching somebody else play a game without me playing. So my first experience with any of it was streaming with you and just watching. And then I was like, no, wait, this is fun particularly because I love that game so much. But yeah, I can see the appeal for sure of
You should
watching people explore these games.
start your own series and also come back as a guest. We will be
I will
delighted to have you again.
very happy to come back as a guest. Whether I figure out the technology and give up the fact that Odyssey is my I eat an edible and shut down and play Odyssey at night. I don't I couldn't do it the same way. But yeah, maybe one day. But I'll definitely come back as a guest.
Oh yeah. We have things planned for Mother's Day. We have Oedipus dating simulation for
Oh
Mother's
my
Day.
god. Oh, that's
You have no
exciting.
idea.
Oh my
You have
god.
no idea.
Okay, I'm gonna be in Greece. I'm gonna try to watch that from over there. Well, truly, thank you so much for doing this. I really appreciate it. It was very, very fun.
Thank you for having me. It was a lot of fun. Less for my throat, but that's my problem.
Thank you all for listening. This was so fun. Plus, you got some bonus insight into what is coming up on the podcast. Coming soon, that is. I thought about cutting out those bits where I kind of give it all away, but honestly, if you want to look into these sources, like what exactly the works are that I just told Kate about at the end of this, I think you'll only get more excited for future episodes. Whew, I've been preparing so many episodes in advance so that I could be off on my trip, but let me tell you, I did not half-ass them. My gods. There is some incredibly fun and funny stuff coming up. The weirdest bits from the ancient world. All incoming. Let's Talk About Myths, Baby is written and produced by me, Liv Albert. Michaela Smith is the Hermes to my Olympians. She honestly handles so much, particularly while I'm away. Just a true lifesaver and always willing to help out with more. I absolutely love her. Stephanie Foley works to transcribe the podcast for YouTube captions and accessibility. Plus, as I've been saying, we have an intern this month. Have I actually worked with her by the time I've recorded this. No, unfortunately, she doesn't start until I'm already in Europe. Such is life. Grace Roby, I am sure she's going to be so helpful. The podcast is hosted and monetized by Acast. I am Liv, and I love this shit.